Good morning, bonjour à tous. Je suis Charlie Angus, porte-parole éthique pour les NPD. September has begun, and all across Canada, university students are returning to classes with a great deal of uncertainty because they remember on April 8th when the Prime Minister made a promise to help them with the crisis of no summer jobs for them, the crisis of huge student debt levels. And what they ended up getting was a deal that was given to the Kielburger group, a group extremely close to the Prime Minister's family, a deal that exploded in controversy, fell apart, and to this day, none of that money has flowed to university students. That scandal has rocked Canadians' confidence in the Prime Minister in the midst of an unprecedented economic and medical crisis. It has cost him his finance minister, and he's been forced to prorogue Parliament to shut down the investigation. And throughout this scandal, the Prime Minister and the Liberal government have affirmed again and again and again that it was the civil service that drove this agenda, that it was the civil service that came up with the idea, that they developed the plan, and it was only approved by the politicians at Cabinet after the Cabinet asked very tough questions of the civil service. But thanks to the government documents that have been revealed, we now know that that is simply not true. Now, admittedly, most of the key documents have been blacked out, but the documents that do exist show us very clearly that Minister Bardish Chagger played the key role in pushing the Kielburgers into the driver's seat of a deal that was with between $500 million and $900 million. And what is deeply disturbing throughout this is that Minister Chagger has gone out of her way to cover her tracks. Why? Well, at Finance Committee, she was the first person to testify, and she stated 23 times in an hour that it was the, quote, professional, nonpartisan public service that came up with the idea. And she simply responded to their requests. That's not true. Why did she say that? She was asked at Finance a direct question, whether or not she'd had any meetings with the WE organization prior to coming to Cabinet. And she did not tell us at that hearing that she had met with Craig Kielburger on April 17th. We didn't find out about that meeting until 4 days later, thanks to the national media doing their job. So why did she not talk about that April 17th meeting? Well, if you look at the documents, it's clear. That was the key moment that drove this agenda forward. Prior to April 17th, you can see in the documents that the government was all over the map. There were many, many options on the table. But after April 17th, there's only one plan. It's the Kielburger plan. ESDC and Finance start to drive hard, leading up to what we now know as the WE scandal. So at Ethics Committee, we had Minister Chagger come and we asked her multiple times what happened in that April 17th meeting. She refused to say. She said it was a listening exercise. She said it was simply to discuss their youth entrepreneurship plan. That was the first proposal. She said she was in no position to promote or advance it because she wasn't the lead person on the file. And she said she didn't take any notes. Well, the Kielburgers and Ms. Marquez did take notes, and we have their point of what happened in that meeting thanks to these documents. So why did she cover up? Was she doing this on her own? Was she trying to garnish her relationship to the Prime Minister when everyone knew that the Kielburger organization was extremely close to the Trudeau family? So close that the documents show that they used pictures of the Trudeau family in their plan to advance the program through all the levels of government. So what do the documents show? Well, on April 17th, Minister Chagger has the meeting that she does not tell Finance or the Ethics Committee about. The next day, April 18th, Finance says they just get off the phone with the ESDC and they say, don't call Shopify, which is one of the other options for delivering this service. Don't call Shopify, quote, we may have a better way. Sunday morning, April 19th, Rachel Wernick from ESDC contacts Craig saying, I'm sorry, this is out of the blue. I know I need your advice. She wants to talk with him about their plan. That's the Sunday morning. By Sunday afternoon, Ms. Wernick is already moving a plan forward, having had advice from Craig Kielburger. So Craig Kielburger, within a day, knows everything that she needs to know to help advance this plan. So it raises the question, because after that April 19th meeting, on April 20th, the first thing Monday morning, Finance is meeting about the Kielburger plan. That's how fast this thing moves. From April 20th, there is only one plan on the table. The plan is the plan that was to be delivered by we. So it raises a question, how did this move so quickly? So what happened in that April 17th meeting? Well, the minister said nothing happened. It was just a listening exercise. But we have an email from Sophia Marquez, the government relations, who said, I want to give you a quick note following our meeting with Minister Chagger on Friday, and these are the highlights. Minister Chagger expressed interest in exploring ways to adapt the entrepreneurship program we submitted. Ms. Chagger expressed her willingness as the next steps to connect we with her team and identify the tangible ways to move this opportunity forward. We have April 22nd, Craig Kielburger to Minister Chagger. Thanks again for your time for Friday. We appreciate your thoughtful offer to connect us with the relevant members of your ministry. And we have outlined a 3-month summer service jobs opportunity to engage 20,000 people to participate in service projects. That is the Canada Student Service Grant. What happens in the April 17th meeting is that the Kielburgers go in with their entrepreneurship plan, and they begin to discuss with Minister Chagger about another plan. And by April 18th, 19th, that becomes the plan. On April 22nd, Sophia Marquez says, allow me to share that we had the opportunity to connect with Minister Chagger and her team on Friday. And one of the main points that came out of our call was the suggestion that we should consider developing a second stream of programming. So it's a second proposal that comes forward by April 22nd. And then further on, we have other documents where on May 3rd, Rachel Wernick is asked, so is we the only option on the table? And she says, I'm okay with putting we as the option if Minister Chagger wants to, because ultimately it is her choice. So what does this mean? Well, it means that in the midst of an unprecedented economic crisis, when Canadians were looking and university students were looking at the Prime Minister to respond to the crisis facing university students, the Kielburger Group was given unprecedented access that nobody else has access to. Access in meetings with ministers, Minister Ning, Minister Morneau, Minister Chagger, to advance the plan. They're giving the advance information on what becomes the Prime Minister's announcement on April 22nd. And by the time the Prime Minister has made his announcement on April 22nd, the Kielburgers, ESDC and Finance are already writing together what becomes the service grant. This is not how you do government business. And I'm very concerned because Minister Chagger was given multiple opportunities to explain her role, and she refused to explain her role, and I think that that's very troubling. Pendant le scandale de oui, le gouvernement de M. Trudeau a affirmé continuellement que étaient les fonctions publiques qui étaient responsables pour le plan. Le gouvernement libéral a affirmé que les fonctions publiques ont développé le plan et a présenté le plan au cabinet. Mais les documents révèlent que ce n'est pas vrai. En fait, Mme Chagger a joué un rôle clé dans la promotion de la charity oui. Elle a piloté la relation entre le Kielburger et les bureaux en finance et ESDC. Avant le 17 avril, le gouvernement y avait beaucoup de potentielles options pour aider les situations pour les étudiants postsecondaires. Mais après la rencontre avec Mme Chagger, oui devient la seule option et la fonction publique suit le ministre dans la promotion de oui. C'est clair, le scandale, oui, a abusé la confiance du public. Cela donnait un accent accès sans précédent pour un groupe qui est très proche avec les familles Trudeau. Ce n'est pas juste. Madame Chagger a joué un rôle essentiel pour la promotion de ce plan et elle doit s'expliquer son rôle. I'll take questions.
We will now take questions, starting with questions on the phone. A quick reminder, one question, one follow-up. Nous allons maintenant prendre les questions, commençant par les questions au téléphone. Un petit rappel que c'est une question de suivi. Opératrice, avons-nous une première question?
Merci. Thank you. The first question is from Tom Korski from Blacklock's Reporter. Please go ahead. Your line is now open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Thank you, Mr. Angus. Do the committees, as you've seen so far, finance, ethics, government operations, have the tools they need to get to the bottom of this?
Well, I think we have a number of important tools, and those tools include getting the documents. So we have been interrupted in our investigation, but I assure you that when Parliament comes back in September, we will reconvene our meetings, and we intend to get the documents, and we intend to get answers.
And in terms of committee subpoena powers, they exist. You can compel witnesses. It's rarely been exercised in terms of enforcement. Do you see any point where it may be necessary for any committee to look seriously at its enforcement powers?
That's a really good question. On the Ethics Committee in the last Parliament, the issue of subpoena and getting access to documents became a very important issue, and I think we used our powers. We threatened subpoenas against witnesses during the Cambridge Analytica investigation. We obtained hard drives from some players. We obtained documents that we felt were important for the parliamentary work. So in terms of this, I'm not going to speculate if we need to use these powers to get more answers from the WE organization or for the government. We expect that people will play a fair role, understand their responsibility to answer Parliament, but we do have these powers, and we have used them at ethics in the past.
Operator,
thank you very much.
Operator, next question.
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from Cormac from City News. Please go ahead. Your line is now open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Hi, Mr. Angus. What recourse, if any, do you or any other MPs have to try and get any access to the blacked out information in the WE document?
What's really disturbing from the blacked out documents with the WE government documents concerning WE is that the government has claimed that this was done by the law clerk, that he was just protecting privacy, and we know now that that's not true. What disturbs me is if we can see what's already in the documents, it shows clear political interference, a clear political drive from the ministers. What we don't have behind those documents may get us even closer to the truth. So we will be pushing for the unredacted documents because the government was given an order to present those documents. The government has tried to protect themselves politically, but they need to answer to the Canadian public for this. And we have a responsibility as parliamentarians to ensure that money being spent in a pandemic is being spent for the interests of the Canadian people and not just friends of the Liberal Party.
And my follow-up is on a different matter. The PCO announced today that Quintet Consulting has been hired to investigate the harassment allegations against Governor General Julie Payette. But in the terms of reference, along with conducting interviews with current and former staff, a final report is expected in the fall and will be submitted to the PCO and Minister Dominic LeBlanc, who's the president of the PCO. But the terms also state the independent third-party reviewer will not be publicly releasing the review report unless required to do so by law. So what do you think of the development in the investigation into the claims against the Governor General? And do you think that the results of this report should be released publicly so Canadians can see the specific allegations and what this independent firm, recommends in terms of action to deal with this?
I think it's really disturbing, the allegations that are coming out in terms of harassment at the Governor General's operation. I have met Madame Payette a number of times, and I have enormous respect for her, but she represents the Canadian people and has to meet the highest standards, and these allegations are deeply concerning. I understand that in investigations of harassment, there are privacy provisions, and I respect that because the people coming forward need to know that their rights will be protected as well. So I'm asking Minister LeBlanc to make a public promise that the overall recommendations of what is found will be made public, and if there's actions that need to be taken, he commits publicly that they will be taken. If there are particular details that need to be kept private to protect the whistleblowers coming forward, I'm okay with that, but I want to know that Minister LeBlanc is going to represent the interests of the Canadian people first and foremost and not try and slip this under the carpet.
Opératrice, prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. La prochaine question est de la presse. La parole est à vous. Your line is now open.
Merci. Bonjour, Monsieur Angus. I'll go just ask this in English. Are you asking for Mr. Chagger's resignation?
I really don't know how Minister Chagger stays in this position, having so clearly misled two committees and misled the Canadian people at this point regarding her role. She has a responsibility not just to be loyal to the Prime Minister, but to be loyal to the people of Canada. So why was she doing this? Was she doing this on her own because she just thought the Kielburgers were a great organization and she drove that? Was she trying to win favor with the Prime Minister because obvious the connection between the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's family? These are deeply concerning questions, but Minister Chagger has been given multiple opportunities to be truthful with the Canadian people. The document shows she played a key role. She has not told us that. I think Canadians would have a lot of misgivings about her maintaining a role such as she has if she can't be trusted to tell the truth about her role in this scandal.
But so to be clear, yes or no, is it a formal NDP request that she resign?
Well, Minister Morneau was forced to resign from this scandal because of his involvement with the Kielburgers. We now know that Madame Chagger played a huge role, so yes, she should step down from her failure to come clean and explain why she had that meeting, what happened in that meeting, and why she drove this. We understand that things can go wrong, but it's up to a minister to be truthful with the Canadian people, and she has failed in that responsibility.
We'll now take questions from the room. Nous allons maintenant passer aux questions dans la salle. Hélène?
Yes, hello, Mr. Angus. Hélène Buzieri from Le Devoir. I just would like to know, why should we care that it's Miss Chagger who got this first contact? Because it seems to me that the reason that we care about the political implication was that because Mr. Morneau and Mr. Trudeau had personal relationship with we and the we leadership, and that personal relationship could blur their judgment. Miss Chagger did not have such a relationship. So why is it important to see that she is the one who came up with that idea and pushed that idea?
I think that's an extremely good question. I mean, certainly Minister Morneau and Minister Trudeau need to explain why they did not recuse themselves when they had such close financial and personal relationships with the Kielburger Group. That is one of the fundamental reasons this scandal became so big. But when we're investigating how a $900 million deal went off the rails, we need to trust that the ministers who drive these projects forward will explain their role and explain what happened. And we never got that clear answer from Minister Chagger. What we see is that meeting becomes the key meeting, and from that point on, we becomes the one group that drives this. And I think what's clear is that this was a poorly thought out plan. This is a plan that failed the second it was announced publicly. If more due diligence had been done, if they were less willing to promote a group that was so close to the Prime Minister, university students may have done better. But right now, university students have received none of the money that was promised. So Minister Chagger failed them.
So in your mind, the problem is not so much that Ms. Chagger got that meeting, but rather that she did not disclose it. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think the problem here is that this was a group that was given access to the key ministers and the key departments that no other group in the country was given. Why were they given that? Well, they were extremely close to the Prime Minister. Minister Chagger had spoken at a WE event. Minister Qualtrough had spoken at a WE event. Minister Morneau was involved with WE. They were deeply embedded with the Liberal government, and it clouded the judgment of the key ministers. So she was given an opportunity to explain what happened. She failed, and it was this unhealthy relationship between WE and the Trudeau government that caused this scandal, and we have university students across this country who've lost out.
Todd Lamarand, APTN News. Good morning, Mr. Angus. My questions are based on the fact you've been a long-time advocate of Indigenous people who've gone to residential schools, and of course, the people who've been litigating for St. Anne's. So I wanted to get how you would characterize the announcement just made by Minister Wilkinson that 2 residential schools are going to be named historic sites. How would you characterize it based on the fact that this is a recommendation out of the TRC?
I think it's really important that we recognize and make it part of the Canadian history, the attempted genocide and destruction of Indigenous families through the stealing of the children. For these schools to be recognized, it needs the involvement of the families and the survivors. If they believe that this is a site that they want commemorated, then it should be commemorated. I can tell you in the case of St. Anne's Residential School, the families wanted that site burnt to the ground because of the horrific memories that it contained. But when we announce something as important as commemorating the history of the residential schools, I want this government to admit that this is not historical, this is ongoing. The government cross-examined St. Anne's leader Edmund Matata-Wabin just this past week. The St. Anne's survivors will be back in court in 2 weeks or 3 weeks because the government has suppressed evidence and continues to fight them. So if the government wants to do historically right by survivors, I would say it's important to recognize the buildings, but they need to do justice. And I'm sending this message clearly to Carolyn Bennett. You have to stop this toxic legal battle against the survivors of St. Anne's. They did nothing wrong. The evidence of the crimes that were committed against them as children is so clear, and yet the government suppressed the evidence and continues to deny them access to justice.
You mentioned St. Anne's, of course, and that the survivors want to have it burnt to the ground. In that case, how would a government or future generations look back at an incident like that if there's no designation as a historical site?
I think in each of the situations we have to respect the survivors who went to those institutions. I know that there are locations in Western Canada that have not been recognized, and it's deeply traumatic for the survivors who went there. St. Anne's, they did not want that building in the community because of what it represented. That's something that the survivors, I think, have to be involved in. But I think it's really important that we do the official commemorations of these institutions that were used to destroy Indigenous identity, so we do not erase the history. But then also, we're looking at the federal government pushing to erase a lot of the records regarding what was found in the hearings and the Truth and Reconciliation. We need to know that this record of what happened to the survivors will be kept so that future researchers and generations will understand the enormity and the culpability of government in attempting to destroy Indigenous people.
Next question.
Hi, Mr. Angus. It's Annie Bergeron-Oliver with CTV National News. On any given day, the federal government and the bureaucrats are negotiating and signing contracts. Right now, a lot of those contracts have to do with PPE and other procurement necessary to fight COVID-19. I'm wondering if you have confidence that the federal government is negotiating these other contracts fairly and following proper protocols.
I think what really disturbs us about the WE scandal is that prior to the WE scandal, Canadians had a real sense of trust that we're in an unprecedented economic and medical crisis. The government is there to work for us. We put our confidence in them. And then we saw the WE scandal. And as soon as that was announced, people said, wait a minute, a group that close to the Prime Minister's office was given that much money? How did that happen? It raises questions about other contracts. I mean, my good friend Frank Baylis, who I sat with a number of years on committee, gets a contract. How did that contract happen for PPE in Montreal or ventilators? I think the government needs to be on notice that the money that they're spending in a pandemic is an unprecedented amount of money. The money has to go out the door fast, but it has to follow the rules so that the Canadian interests are put first and not just people who know people in the government, not just the power of the lobbyists.
And on a separate subject, we've had the COVID-19 app for just over a month now. I'm wondering if you think that app is doing what it's supposed to, if enough people are downloading it, and if you've heard any concerns from Canadians about it.
We certainly had a number of concerns about the COVID app before it was brought in because the government had not met with the Privacy Commissioner. In order to use technology of this nature to aid in a pandemic, we have to have high levels of public confidence. We need a vast majority of people engaged in using it, and to that they have to be assured that it will protect their privacy as their right. I was very pleased to see that the government finally began to work with the Privacy Commissioner on this. And so for the New Democrats, we support the COVID app. We support the protections. We do recognize that there are probably going to be problems with it. We don't know how the technology will work because we're in uncharted waters. But if we have the principle that the privacy rights of citizens have to come first and foremost, and that's part of it, then we're willing to work with the government on the COVID tests.
I'll go back to the phone quickly to check if we have another question. Opératrice?
Thank you. Merci. Once again, please press star 1 on your telephone keypad if you have a question. De nouveau, n'hésitez pas de faire étoile 1 pour toute question. There are no questions registered at this time. Il n'y a pas de questions pour le moment, alors je vous retourne l'appel.
Back to the room. Retour dans la salle.
Merveilleux. Bonjour, Monsieur Angus. Catherine Lévesque de la Presse canadienne. I'll switch back to English now. Just going back to Ms. Chagger, is her resignation a condition for the NDP to support the throne speech in 3 weeks?
Our focus right now is getting Canadians through the biggest economic and medical crisis in a century. We're asking the Prime Minister to do the right thing, to work with the opposition, to put forward a plan to get Canadians through what could be a very hard and difficult fall and winter. We expect accountability from the government, and I expect the Prime Minister to show accountability, but our focus right now is going to be what's in that throne speech when it comes to whether we support the government or not.
Okay, so I'm understanding that the NDP still hasn't made a decision as to whether it will support or not the throne speech?
Well, we have said to the Prime Minister, you have an opportunity in a minority government to work with the opposition. We are calling for a progressive vision that will get us Canadians through this unprecedented economic and medical crisis. We want to work with you, but we're not going to be pushed around. So it's up to the Prime Minister. We've reached out our hand to work with him, and we shall see what he does when we come back in September.
Next question.
Yes, sir. Lee Berthium, Canadian Press. I just wanted to ask, having gone through these 5,000 plus documents, did you see any indication of nefarious intent here?
I think what we saw is a lot of blacked out documents. So we're having to parse what we found. I think what's really disturbing is that clearly the April 17th meeting becomes the key meeting. So why didn't Minister Chagger, when she was asked at committee, say, oh yeah, I met with them on April 17th? She didn't say that. She was asked at ethics, why didn't you tell us that? She skated around. It made us start to look at that April 17th meeting, and we saw that that was a key driver in this. What I found was really disturbing in the documents was the fact that in the PowerPoint presentation used to promote this to government, and to senior cabinet ministers and their staff, they were using pictures of the Trudeau family. I don't think you could make it any clearer that the Kielburgers knew that they were very close to the Prime Minister, and they knew the Prime Minister was very close to them. I think that that was very, very unacceptable. And the fact that at no point do we see anywhere in any of the documents that anyone raised a question of ethical conflict of interest, it, to me, is very damning about the operating culture within the Prime Minister's office.
And you referenced students numerous times. What more needs to be done for students, especially as they're about to start classes again?
I think that $900 million that was promised, that was never delivered, should be used to help deal with student debt. We have a number of students who are having to consider whether they're going back to school or not. With this crisis, I think the Prime Minister could send a very clear message and say the money that was supposed to be in this bizarre volunteer scheme that they came up with, we could use that to deal with student tuition right now, and I think that would take a lot of pressure off students.
Next question.
David Thurton, CBC News. You mentioned in one of the documents that there was a message from Rachel Wernick to Minister Chagger about saying that this was a decision that should be in the hands of the minister. sorry to get all technical and processy. Where, what's the page number? Where can we find that document? Is
I can give you. There's two documents that one says one's a handwritten note that says this is in the minister's office, like the decision power, the driving is coming from the minister's office. There's another where I have the document and I can get it for you, where Wernick is asked why she's not mentioning we. In particular, is we the only option on the table? And she says, I'm okay with putting we if Minister Chagger wants to. Ultimately, it's her choice. So for Minister Chagger to tell us that, Rachel Wernick came up with this idea and she brought it to me and then I listened to her and then I asked a lot of tough questions. And after the civil service did all their work, I agreed. What we're seeing from Rachel Wernick is saying this is being driven by Minister Chagger. So I can get you that document.
Would you be able to just stay behind and maybe you can just show us where those documents are coming from? Because it's a lot of pages and that would help us a big deal.
Yeah.
And so essentially, are you saying to us today, because we've heard from numerous public servants, that this was the decision to award we the contract was a decision that was independently made by public servants? Are you essentially saying that we're not hearing the truth from these public servants? That
I think the documents show us clearly that after that meeting with Minister Chagger, we is put in the driver's seat. That at that 17th meeting, what they go in to talk about their first proposal becomes the second proposal. That both Craig Kielburger references the suggestions from Minister Chagger and the offer to push it forward. Sophia Marquez mentions Chagger's willingness to put it forward and the fact that it was a second proposal. So within the next day, other options are being told, stand down. Don't call Shopify. We may have another option on the table. By Sunday evening, ESDC has a plan that's already being written with Craig Kielburger, and by the Monday morning, Finance is meeting with them. And from that moment on, if you look at the documents, there is no other suggestion on the table. That's the only suggestion. So it happens in that April 17th meeting. That is completely contrary to what the Liberals told us. The Liberals told us again and again and again that this was all, come up with a civil service. It was all from them. It was all their idea, and we just asked questions afterwards. That's not what the documents tell us.
Thank you. Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse. This concludes the press conference.